The radio crackled to life at 3:17 a.m., jolting me from the kind of half-sleep you get used to in the ranger station. Static filled the small room, then a voice I didn't recognize. "Station 7, this is... Can anyone hear me?" I sat up in my cot, reaching for the handset. The voice was thin, stretched, scared. "This is Station 7, go ahead." Nothing but static. I tried again. "Unknown caller, this is Ranger Patterson at Station 7. What's your location?" The static cut out completely. Dead air. I stared at the radio for a full minute, waiting for something. Anything, but the silence felt heavy, like it was pressing against the windows of my station. That was 3 weeks ago. I should have written it up in my log, should have reported it to the district office, but I didn't. I told myself it was just someone with a broken radio, maybe a hiker who got turned around. The equipment fails out here all the time. I was wrong. Before I get into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you somewhere safe? Somewhere with good cell service and neighbors close by? Hold on to that feeling. Okay, let's get started with the story of Marcus Patterson, a forest ranger who found himself face to face with something that should not exist in these ancient woods of the Olympic Peninsula. I've been working the Olympic National Forest for 6 years now. Station 7 sits about 15 miles northeast of Port Angeles, tucked into a valley between two ridgelines that haven't seen a clear cut in over a century. The trees here are old, really old. Some of the Douglas firs were already giants when Lewis and Clark were still paddling up the Columbia River. Most people think a ranger's job is pretty straightforward. Check permits, watch for fires, help lost hikers, and for the first 5 years, that's exactly what it was. Quiet work. Peaceful even. The kind of job where your biggest excitement might be a black bear getting into someone's campsite cooler. I took the posting because I needed quiet. My marriage had fallen apart the year before. Sarah said I'd become a ghost in my own house after Danny died. She wasn't wrong. Our 8-year-old son had been dead for 13 months when I moved out here, and I still couldn't sleep without seeing his face in those last moments at the hospital. The woods felt like the right place to disappear for a while. Station 7 is a small log building with living quarters, an office, and a communications setup. Solar panels and a backup generator keep everything running. My nearest neighbor is Jake Morrison at Station 4, about 12 miles south. We check in with each other every few days, mostly just to prove we're still breathing. The work suited me. Long days hiking the trails. Nights spent reading or listening to the radio. The forest had its own rhythm, birds calling at dawn, wind moving through the canopy, the distant sound of Deer Creek running down toward the valley. After a while, you learn to read the woods like a familiar book. You know when something's different. 3 weeks ago, something became different. It started small, subtle. The kind of changes you might not notice unless you'd been living in the same patch of wilderness for years. The bird call shifted first. We have a healthy population of Steller's jays that normally start their racket around sunrise, but they began going quiet earlier, cutting off their calls mid-song like someone had flipped a switch. Then the deer patterns changed. I'd gotten used to seeing the same small herd drinking from Deer Creek around dusk. 6 does and 2 young bucks, creatures of habit like most wildlife, but they stopped coming to their usual spots. When I did see deer, they were always moving, heads up, ears swiveling, walking like they were being followed. I told myself it was seasonal behavior. Maybe a cougar had moved into the territory. Big cats can make everything else nervous for miles around, but cougars don't usually affect the birds, and they definitely don't affect the trees. That's the thing nobody talks about when they discuss forests. Trees communicate. Not in any mystical sense, it's science. Their root systems connect through fungal networks, sharing resources and information. When a tree is under stress from disease or insects, it sends chemical signals through these networks to warn its neighbors. But what do you call it when perfectly healthy trees start dropping their needles in midsummer? It began with a single Douglas fir about a quarter mile from my station. Massive tree, easily 150 feet tall, probably 200 years old. I'd walked past it hundreds of times. It was one of those landmarks you use to navigate. The big fir with the lightning scar about 15 feet up its trunk. One morning I walked the trail and found a circle of fresh needles around its base. Not the usual scattered pattern you see from wind or weather. A perfect circle, like the tree had shed them all at once during the night. The tree itself looked fine. Bark was healthy. No signs of beetles or disease. But when I looked up into its canopy, something felt wrong. The branches seemed too still. Even with a decent breeze moving through the forest, that tree stood motionless. I made a note in my log. Douglas fir showing stress. Investigate for pest disease issues. Standard procedure. But that night, lying in my cot, I kept thinking about how quiet the forest had become around that tree. No insects, no bird calls. Even the usual rustling of small animals moving through the underbrush had stopped. The next morning, I found 2 more trees showing the same pattern, same perfect circles of needles, same unnatural stillness, both within 100 yards of the first tree. That's when I called Jake Morrison. You notice anything weird with the trees in your sector? Weird how? Jake's voice crackled through the radio. He'd been doing this job longer than me. Probably seen everything the forest could throw at you. Needle drop. But not normal seasonal stuff. Whole trees shedding at once. Static filled the channel for a moment. Nah, nothing like that down here. Could be bark beetles. They've been moving north with the warmer summers. Already checked. No beetle sign. Drought stress maybe? We've had a dry couple weeks. I looked out my window at the heavy morning dew covering everything in sight. I don't think that's it either. Well, document it and send photos to the district office. They'll want to get a plant pathologist out there if it spreads. He was right, of course. That was the protocol. But something made me hesitate, some instinct I couldn't name. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks, Jake. No problem. And Marcus? Keep an eye on yourself out there. Being alone too long can make you see patterns that aren't really there. I signed off and stared at the radio for a long time after that. Jake meant well, but he didn't understand. This wasn't about isolation making me paranoid. This was about 6 years of watching the same forest, learning its moods, knowing when something fundamental had changed. By the end of the week, I'd counted 17 trees showing the same behavior. Always Douglas firs. Always the same perfect circle of shed needles. And always that strange stillness, like they'd been frozen in place. But it was the 18th tree that made me realize I wasn't dealing with any kind of natural phenomenon. I found it on a Friday morning during my regular patrol of the northern trails. Another massive Douglas fir. This one growing right beside the trail where I'd walked past it 1,000 times before. Same circle of needles. Same unnatural stillness. But this tree had something the others didn't. Carved into its bark, about chest high, were symbols I'd never seen before. Not words exactly, but not random scratches either. They looked deliberate, purposeful. Like letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize, the cuts were fresh. Sap was still weeping from the wounds. But here's what made my skin crawl. The bark around the symbols was completely smooth. No tool marks. No rough edges. The symbols looked like they'd been burned into the wood rather than carved. I took photos with my phone, though I'm not sure why. My hands were shaking as I worked. Something about those symbols made me want to look away, but I forced myself to document everything. The pattern, the tree's condition, the way the forest around it seemed to hold its breath. That night, I sat in my station staring at the photos on my phone screen. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them, like my peripheral vision was picking up movement that wasn't really there. I tried searching online for similar markings, indigenous petroglyphs, forestry markers, surveyor symbols. Nothing matched. The closest thing I could find were some references to Norse runes, but even those looked completely different. Around midnight, I gave up and put the phone away, but as I was getting ready for bed, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling my station. I grabbed my flashlight and moved to the window, but the beam barely penetrated 20 feet into the darkness between the trees. The footsteps stopped when I turned on the light, but I could feel something out there. Watching. Waiting. I stayed by the window for over an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I managed to fall asleep in my chair. I woke up to find my radio crackling with static. It was 3017 a.m. again. And then that same voice came through, clearer this time. "Station 7, I know you can hear me." My blood went cold. The voice was mine. My own voice, calling to me through the radio. "I know you can hear me, Marcus. I know you found the trees." I reached for the handset with a trembling hand. "Who is this?" Laughter came through the speaker. My own laughter, but wrong somehow. Too hollow. Too empty. "You know who this is. You've always known. Ever since Danny died, you've been waiting for me to find you." The radio went dead. I sat there in the dark for the rest of the night, staring at the silent radio, trying to convince myself I'd been dreaming. But the recording light on my equipment was still blinking. Whatever had just happened, it was real enough to trigger the automatic logging system. When dawn came, I made myself go outside to check for footprints around the station. The ground was soft from the morning dew, perfect for holding tracks. I found them immediately. Boot prints in a perfect circle around my building. Size 11, same as mine. Same tread pattern as the hiking boots I was wearing. But here's what made me grab onto the station's wall for support. The prints were all facing inward, toward the building, like someone had walked backward in a circle, never taking their eyes off my windows. I followed the trail into the forest, but after about 50 yards, the prints simply stopped. Not like they'd reached hard ground or been covered by debris. They just ended, mid-stride, as if whoever had been making them had simply vanished into thin air. That's when I noticed the tree. 20 feet away, another Douglas fir had shed its needles in a perfect circle, and carved into its bark were the same symbols I'd photographed the day before. Except these symbols were different. Still unreadable, still burned rather than carved. But somehow, I understood what they meant. They spelled out my son's name, Danny. I ran back to the station and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work my radio. Station 4. This is Station 7. Emergency. Jake's voice came back immediately. "Marcus, what's wrong? I need you to come up here, right now." "What's the situation?" I stared at the photos on my phone, at the symbols that spelled my dead son's name in an alphabet that shouldn't exist, at the boot prints circling my station like some kind of ritual. I paused, knowing how crazy it would sound. "I think something's been watching me." "On my way," Jake said without hesitation. "ETA 45 minutes. Stay put." I spent those 45 minutes going through my equipment, checking every system twice. Radio working. Emergency beacon functional. Satellite phone showing full bars. Everything normal except for the forest outside my windows, which had gone completely silent. No bird calls. No insect noise. Even the wind had stopped. When Jake's truck finally pulled up to my station, I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees nearly buckled. He climbed out wearing his standard ranger uniform, radio clipped to his belt, familiar grin on his weathered face. "You look like hell, Marcus," he said, walking up to my front door. "Yeah, well, I feel worse." I opened the door and stepped outside. "Thanks for coming up here. I know this probably seems..." I stopped talking. Jake was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not concern or confusion. Something else. Something that made my mouth go dry. "You said something was watching you," he said quietly. "I found these symbols carved into trees, and last night." "Show me." There was something off about his voice. Too flat. Too controlled. But I was so grateful to have another human being there that I ignored the warning signals my brain was sending. "This way," I said, leading him toward the tree line. We walked in silence for 10 minutes, following the trail toward the 18th tree. Jake stayed a few steps behind me, his boots crunching on the fallen needles. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, but they seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet of the forest. When we reached the tree with the symbols, I turned to point them out to Jake. He wasn't there. I spun around, heart hammering. The trail behind me was empty, no sign of Jake anywhere. But his footprints were still visible in the soft earth, leading right up to where I was standing, and then stopping. "Jake?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely in the silent forest, bouncing back from the trees with a hollow, metallic quality I'd never heard before. That's when I noticed the new symbols on the tree. Below Danny's name, burned into the bark in those same impossible letters, was another word I somehow understood. I backed away from the tree, pulling out my radio. "Station 4. This is Station 7. Jake, where are you?" Static answered me. "Jake, respond, please. This is Marcus at Station 7. More static, and then, this is Station 4. Relief flooded through me. "Jake, thank God. Where did you go?" "1 second, you were behind me then." "Marcus, what are you talking about? I've been at my station all morning." The forest seemed to tilt around me. "What? No, you came up here. You said you were on your way 45 minutes ago." "I never got any emergency call from you," Jake said, his voice carrying that concerned tone I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should come down to my station for a few days." "Being alone up there?" I cut him off and ran back toward my station, crashing through the underbrush like something was chasing me. When I reached the building, I saw Jake's truck parked exactly where it had been when he arrived. Except the truck was covered in dust. Thick dust, like it had been sitting there for weeks. I approached it slowly, my hand on my sidearm. The driver's door was unlocked. I pulled it open and looked inside. The interior was wrong, not Jake's truck at all, despite looking identical from the outside. The seats were a different color. The radio was an older model, and hanging from the rearview mirror was a small wooden cross that I recognized immediately. It was Danny's, the one Sarah had put in his casket. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My radio crackled to life again. "Station 7, Marcus, can you hear me?" My own voice again, but this time there was something else mixed in with it. A child's laughter, high and pure and heartbreakingly familiar. "Daddy?" Danny's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear. "Daddy, where are you? I've been looking for you." I grabbed the handset so hard my knuckles went white. "Danny? Baby, is that you?" "I'm in the woods, Daddy, the deep woods, but I can't find my way out. The trees won't let me leave." Tears were streaming down my face. "Where are you, son? Tell Daddy where you are. Follow the symbols, Daddy. Follow them deep into the forest. But hurry, before the other one finds you first." "What other one?" "Danny, what other one?" The radio went silent except for static. I stood there for a long time holding the handset, waiting for my son's voice to come back. But the only sound was the wind picking up in the trees around my station. And then I heard it. Footsteps again, but not circling this time. Coming closer. I drew my sidearm and backed against the station wall. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, like whoever was making them knew I had nowhere to run. "Who's there?" I called out. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, humming. A child's voice humming a lullaby. Sarah used to sing to Danny when he couldn't sleep, the same lullaby I'd hummed to him in the hospital during those final days. The humming was coming from the forest to my left, then my right, then behind me, surrounding me. I raised my weapon, trying to track the sound, but it seemed to move through the trees like smoke. Always just out of sight, always just beyond the range of my flashlight. "Danny?" I whispered. The humming stopped. "Daddy, I'm here," came the voice. Definitely Danny's voice, but distorted somehow, like it was coming from underwater. "I'm in the deep woods. Come find me." Every instinct I had as a ranger, as a rational human being, screamed at me to get in my truck and drive straight to the district office, report everything, let someone else figure out what was happening. But it was my son's voice. I holstered my weapon and grabbed my gear. Emergency pack, GPS, satellite phone, extra batteries for my flashlight. If I was going into the deep woods, I was going prepared. The symbols on the trees would be my guide. Danny had said to follow them, and despite everything rational thought was telling me, I trusted that voice. I had to. The first marked tree was the one I'd found that morning, with Danny's name burned into the bark. From there, I followed a rough trail deeper into the forest than I'd ever been. This was old-growth territory, the kind of place where the canopy was so thick that noon looked like twilight. Every 100 yards or so, I found another marked tree. The symbols changed each time, but somehow I understood their meaning. This way. Deeper. Hurry. I'd been walking for maybe an hour when I realized the forest around me was wrong. Not wrong in any way I could put my finger on immediately. The trees were still Douglas firs and western hemlocks. The undergrowth was still the familiar mix of ferns and moss-covered fallen logs. But the proportions were off. Everything seemed larger than it should be. The trees towered higher. The spaces between them yawned wider. And there was no sound at all. In 6 years of working these woods, I'd never experienced complete silence. There's always something. Wind in the branches, insects buzzing, the distant call of a bird. But this was the kind of absolute quiet you only hear in places where nothing lives. My GPS started acting up around the 2-hour mark. The screen would flicker, showing my position jumping randomly across the map. Sometimes it placed me hundreds of miles away. Sometimes it couldn't get a fix at all. The satellite phone did the same thing. Full bars one moment, no signal the next. But I kept walking, following the symbols from tree to tree, because what choice did I have? My son was out here somewhere, and he needed me. The trail led steadily upward, along ridgelines I didn't recognize from any of the Forest Service maps. Ridgelines that shouldn't exist in this part of the Olympic Peninsula. But there they were, solid rock and ancient trees, rising higher into mountains that seemed to scrape the belly of low-hanging clouds. It was getting dark when I found the clearing, a perfect circle, maybe 50 feet across, where no trees grew. The ground was covered in that same moss I'd been seeing throughout the forest, but here it formed intricate patterns, spirals, and geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the clearing stood a single Douglas fir, massive beyond anything I'd ever seen, easily 300 feet tall and 20 feet across at the base. Its trunk was covered in symbols from ground level all the way up to where it disappeared into the darkness above. And sitting at the base of the tree, his back against the bark, was Danny. My son. 8 years old, wearing the same Superman t-shirt he'd had on the day he died. His hair was still that impossible cowlick that never wanted to lie flat. His sneakers were still untied because he'd never quite mastered the bunny ears technique. He looked up at me and smiled. "Hi, Daddy." I dropped my pack and ran to him, falling to my knees and pulling him into my arms. He felt real, solid, warm. He smelled like the hospital soap they'd used to wash him, mixed with that distinctive little boy scent of grass stains and adventure. Danny, oh God, Danny, I've missed you so much. I was crying openly now, holding him tight enough that it should have hurt, but he just hugged me back, his small arms wrapping around my neck. I missed you too, Daddy, but I couldn't leave, not until you came to get me. I pulled back to look at his face. Those same brown eyes, the same freckles across his nose, the same gap between his front teeth from where he'd fallen off his bike the summer before he got sick. How are you here, buddy? How is this possible? Danny's expression grew serious. The trees brought me here. They said you needed me. They said you were hurting so bad that you might do something scary. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean, something scary? The gun, Daddy. In your desk drawer back home. You think about it sometimes, when you're really sad. My blood turned to ice. He was right. There were nights, especially in those first months after the divorce, when I'd sat in my empty house staring at my service weapon and wondering if the pain would ever stop. But that's not the answer, Danny continued. The trees showed me. There's a different way. A better way. What way? Danny stood up and took my hand. His skin was cold now, colder than it should be. "You can stay here with me, Daddy, in the deep woods where nothing can hurt us anymore." He led me toward the giant tree, and I saw that the symbols carved into its bark were moving, shifting and writhing like living things, spelling out words in that impossible alphabet I was somehow learning to read. "Come home," they said. "Come home to us. Come home forever." "Danny, I don't understand. What is this place?" "It's where people go when they can't let go," he said simply. "The trees are very old, Daddy, older than anything. They remember everyone who's ever died in these woods, everyone who's ever been lost or forgotten. And sometimes, when someone alive is hurting bad enough, the trees call them home too." We were almost to the base of the giant tree now. Up close, I could see that its bark was covered in names, thousands of them, carved in dozens of different languages and scripts. Some looked fresh, others were weathered with age. "All these people," I whispered. "They all came here for the same reason you did," Danny said. "They couldn't live with the pain anymore." So the trees gave them a different choice. My son looked up at me with those familiar brown eyes, but there was something else there now. Something ancient and patient and not entirely human. "You can carve your name next to mine, Daddy, right here on the tree. And then we can be together forever. No more hurt, no more loneliness. Just us, in the woods where time doesn't matter." I stared at the tree, at all those names, at the symbols that continued to shift and dance across its surface. And for a moment, I was tempted. God help me, I was actually tempted. To never have to wake up to another empty morning. To never have to see Danny's empty bedroom, or Sarah's divorce papers, or the condolence cards I still couldn't bring myself to throw away. To just stop. But then I noticed something that made my breath catch. One of the names carved into the tree bark was moving toward the base, toward where Danny was standing. And I could read it now, spelled out in those impossible symbols. Marcus Patterson. My name was already there. Maybe since the moment you decided to become a forest ranger. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You're not Danny. The thing wearing my son's face smiled sadly. I'm what you need me to be. I'm the part of Danny that you carry with you. The part that hurts so much you can't bear to be alive with it. But you're not him. No, it admitted. But I could be, if you let me. If you carve your name into the tree and let the forest take you home. I looked around the clearing with new eyes. The geometric patterns in the moss weren't decorative. They were a trap, a snare designed to catch people like me, people who'd lost so much they'd lost the will to keep living. And the giant tree wasn't just a tree. It was something else entirely, something that fed on grief and despair and the kind of love that turns toxic when it can't let go. "The radio calls," I said. "That was you." "The forest speaks through many voices," the Danny thing agreed. "It's been calling to you for months. Every time you sat alone in your station, thinking about endings. Every time you looked at that gun in your desk drawer. Every time you wished you could have died instead of him." "And Jake? This morning? You wanted someone to validate your pain. Someone to tell you it was okay to give up. So the forest gave you what you wanted." I thought about the truck outside my station covered in dust. About Jake's voice on the radio, claiming he'd never received my emergency call. Jake never came, did he? "Jake Morrison transferred to Oregon 3 months ago," the thing said gently. "You've been alone up there much longer than you remember. The forest has been, adjusting your perception, making it easier for you to take the final step." Breadcrumbs leading me deeper into the woods. The strange symbols that I could somehow read, not because they were ancient, but because they spoke directly to the part of my brain that wanted to understand them. And my son's voice calling to me through the radio, not Danny reaching out from beyond death, but my own grief made manifest by something that understood exactly how to use it against me. "You're harvesting people," I said. "The forest provides sanctuary," it corrected, "for those who are ready to stop fighting." I looked at the tree again, at all those names carved into its bark. How many lost souls had found their way here over the centuries? How many grieving parents and broken lovers and guilt-ridden survivors had carved their names into this thing's flesh and simply stopped? What happens to them? To the people whose names are on the tree? They become part of the forest. Their pain becomes nourishment. Their memories become dreams that play out among the branches. They find peace. And you? What are you? The Danny thing's form began to shift slightly, becoming less solid around the edges. I'm what grows from that nourishment, a voice that speaks in the language of what people need to hear most. For you, I'm your son. For others, it shrugged, a lost parent, a dead spouse, a child who never got to be born. I backed toward the edge of the clearing, but my feet felt heavy. Part of me, a large part, still wanted to carve my name into that tree, still wanted to lie down in the soft moss and let whatever this was take away the pain. You don't have to be afraid, the Danny thing said, following me. Look around you, Daddy. Look at how peaceful it is here. No more hurt, no more regret, no more waking up every morning and remembering that I'm gone. And it was peaceful. Despite everything I'd learned, despite knowing what this place really was, the clearing felt like sanctuary, the kind of perfect quiet you only find in dreams. But then, I heard something that changed everything. Laughter. Real laughter, faint and distant but unmistakably human. And it was coming from outside the clearing. Someone else is out here, I said. The Danny thing's expression darkened. No one else would come this deep. But the laughter came again, closer this time. And with it, voices. Multiple voices, talking and joking like they were on a casual hike. I pushed through the tree line at the edge of the clearing and saw lights moving through the forest below. Flashlight beams sweeping back and forth, accompanied by the sound of people crashing through the underbrush. "Hello?" I shouted. "Up here!" The lights stopped moving. "Did you hear that?" came a voice. Young, female, very much alive. "Someone's up there," another voice replied. "Male, maybe college-aged." The Danny thing appeared beside me, but it looked different now. Less solid, more desperate. "They don't belong here," it said urgently. "This is a sacred place. They'll ruin everything." But I was already scrambling down the slope toward the voices, crashing through ferns and stumbling over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear the Danny thing calling my name, but its voice was changing, becoming less like my son and more like something that had never been human at all. I found them about halfway down the ridge. 3 college kids, 2 guys and a girl, all wearing expensive hiking gear and looking completely lost. "Thank God," the girl said when she saw me. "Are you a ranger? We've been wandering around for hours trying to find the trail back to the parking area." "Yeah, I'm a ranger," I managed, though my voice sounded strange even to me. "What are you doing out here this late?" "We started at Deer Creek around noon," one of the guys said. "Just wanted to do a day hike, but we took a wrong turn somewhere and now nothing looks familiar. Deer Creek. The same creek that ran past my station. These kids were lost, but they were in the real forest. The normal forest where GPS worked and time moved in straight lines and trees didn't have names carved into their bark." "How did you find me?" I asked. "We saw your light up on the ridge," the girl said. "Figured you might know the way out." I looked back up the slope toward the clearing. There was no light visible, no sign of the giant tree or the geometric patterns in the moss. Just normal forest, dark and quiet but not supernaturally so. "Can you get us back to the parking area?" the second guy asked. "We've got people expecting us." I pulled out my GPS. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. It showed our position clearly about 3 miles northeast of the Deer Creek trailhead. A perfectly normal location in a perfectly normal forest. "Yeah," I said, my voice stronger now. "I can get you out." As we hiked down toward the creek, following trails I knew by heart, I kept looking back over my shoulder. But the clearing was gone. The ridge where I'd found it showed nothing but normal old-growth forest, dark and peaceful under the stars. The kids chattered as we walked, talking about their classes and weekend plans and all the mundane concerns of people who belong firmly in the world of the living. Their voices were like an anchor, pulling me back from whatever edge I'd been standing on. When we reached their car at the trailhead parking area, I watched them drive away with a mixture of relief and something else. Something that might have been gratitude. I sat in my truck for a long time after they left, staring up at the dark forest. Part of me wondered if I should go back. Try to find that clearing again. See if the Danny thing was still waiting for me. But I knew I wouldn't find it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because those college kids had done something the forest entity couldn't account for. They'd reminded me that there was still a world outside my grief, still people who needed help finding their way home. I drove back to Station 7 as the sun was coming up, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink that I'd forgotten could be beautiful. The station looked exactly as I'd left it, minus Jake's dust-covered truck. My equipment was functioning normally. The radio crackled with the usual morning check-ins from other rangers across the district. Real voices. Human voices. People doing their jobs and living their lives and moving forward through time like normal people do. I made coffee and sat down to write my incident report. But how do you document something that might not have happened? How do you explain that you spent a night in a clearing that exists outside normal space and time, talking to a manifestation of your own grief? In the end, I wrote about the college kids, how I'd found them lost on the North Ridge and guided them back to the trailhead. Standard ranger work, the kind of story that made sense in daylight. But I kept the photos on my phone. The pictures of the symbols burned into tree bark. And sometimes, late at night when the station is quiet and the forest presses close against my windows, I look at them and wonder, the trees are still out there. The deep woods where time doesn't work right and grief can take physical form and broken people go to stop hurting. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, I can hear my name being called from somewhere among the Douglas firs. My son's voice, patient and loving and infinitely sad, asking why I won't come home. But I don't go. Because I learned something in that clearing that the forest entity didn't expect me to learn. Danny wouldn't want me to stop living. The real Danny, not the thing wearing his face, would want me to keep going. To help lost hikers find their way back to the parking area. To make sure other grieving parents don't get so lost in their pain that they carve their names into trees that hunger for human sorrow. I still miss him. God, I miss him every day. But missing someone isn't the same as being ready to die. The forest is patient. It's been here longer than human civilization, and it'll be here long after we're gone. It can wait for me to change my mind, to reach that point where the pain becomes too much to bear. Maybe someday I'll be ready to walk back into those deep woods and find that clearing again. Maybe someday I'll be tired enough to carve my name next to all the others and let whatever grows in that place take away my hurt. But not today. Today I have work to do. Trails to patrol. Hikers to help. A world full of living people who need someone to guide them home when they lose their way. And if you're ever hiking in the Olympic National Forest and you see trees that have shed their needles in perfect circles, or symbols burned into bark that you somehow understand despite never having seen them before, or if you hear voices calling your name from the deep woods, don't follow them, no matter whose voice it is, no matter how much you miss them. Turn around and walk back to your car and drive away and don't look back. The forest remembers everyone it's ever lost, and sometimes it gets lonely enough to call them home.